Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with several cards, shaker cards, and one with glow-in-the-dark elements. I had a lot of fun. This is for this month's release with Pretty Pink Posh, which is all Halloween themed. Love. So, I'm starting off with three of the new layering stencil sets. This first one is the layered candy corn stencil set. It's perfect. So I have dark gray cardstock that's A2 sized, and I taped the stencil to the cardstock, and then I am using Distress Oxide inks. So this first layer, I am using Mustard Seed Oxide ink. And then you line up the second stencil, super easy. And I'm going to use Carved Pumpkin Distress Oxide ink. And I'm using blending brushes. And I'm going in with a fairly heavy hand because I'm doing this on such dark cardstock. Oxides will show up on dark cardstock. It will be a little bit more subtle, but that's what I was going for. So I just used a heavy hand with the ink and my blending brush. And then as I was doing this, I was like, there's so much ink. There's so much ink on these stencils. So I end up actually reusing the stencils. Like I just left the ink sitting on them, set them aside, and created like the insides of the cards, which I'll get to in a second. So for the third layer, I am using Ink on 3's Shark Tooth Atelier ink. One of the best white pigment inks. It is super pigmented, and like everything, I'll have links to all the supplies in the description box below. So yes, blending that over this stencil, and then it creates the tricolor candy corn. Love. Don't really care for candy corn in real life. It's just too sweet. I can't handle it, but I love the look of it. Although I've heard having you mix candy corn with peanuts, it's supposed to be an amazing snack, but I'm just oh, my teeth hurt thinking about it. Anyway, so I had all this leftover ink on these stencils. So I'm not re-inking the brush. I am not putting the brush back in the ink pad. I'm just swirling it over the stencil and just reusing the ink. And I actually was able to do the insides of 2 cards with that, plus another panel of white cardstock, which I wasn't planning on doing, but I was like, it's all sitting here. I got all the ink. Why not? So because I'm working on white cardstock with these, for that third layer, the white Shark Tooth white ink isn't going to show up. But to get around that, that was the one stencil I did actually wipe off. These two didn't. So I used the same Carved Pumpkin and Mustard Seed Oxide inks. So just kept going along. Here's this just panel of white cardstock. You get a lot of bang for your buck with this. So once I had those blended, for the remaining piece of the candy corn, I actually used just weathered wood distress ink and just a very light hand. I'm not going in really heavy. Kind of swirl the brush off there just to remove some of the extra ink, and again, just really light hand. And that way you get, that almost like a shadow to give the impression of that white piece of candy corn on white cardstock. So it just worked. And then I repeat the process, of course, on the remaining inside of the card and the other white card panel. With the insides of the cards, I was masking off at the score line, so I wasn't getting ink past the score line. All of my cards are going to be top folding A2 cards in the end. So that was the layered candy corn. And then I'm using the layered pumpkins with the same Carved Pumpkin Distress Oxide ink. So you start with the just main pumpkin stencil here. And same thing, blending brush, apply the ink over top of this. I did the same thing on what would be the inside of the card, just pretty much reusing what ink was left over on the stencil. And then the next layer of the stencil has the little stems and leaves. And to do that, I'm using my go-to leaf color combo with Distress inks, and that is Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness. And I'm just using a smaller blending brush this time because there's little areas, the stem and the leaf are right next to each other. So I added the Twisted Citron first, and then just picked up a bit of the Rustic Wilderness, blended that on. And then for the little stems, I'm using Vintage Photo Oxide ink, and same thing. That what was left over on the stencil, I end up using on the inside of the card, which I'll show at the end. So did that, and you could just leave these here. Like if you didn't want to add the pumpkin faces, you know, you could just create a cute little fall pumpkin background. But of course, there's this stencil that has the fun little faces. So that I used VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink, blended that over, and got my spooky little pumpkin faces. These backgrounds were so much fun to make. So for my final background, I'm using the Layered Ghosts stencil set. And again, just working on dark gray cardstock, using the Shark Tooth white ink first. I went in a little lighter with this. I didn't go as heavy handed as I did when I did the little like candy corn. Just thinking, you know, little ghosts that they're not perfectly solid. They're sort of see-through. That's, you know, my thought process. So I blended that onto there. And then for the inside of the card, this time I just didn't clean off the stencil, mostly because by this point I was starting to get lazy. I used that weathered wood ink again, and a light hand, and just lightly blended over these little ghosts onto what will be the inside of the card. And then the next layer is their little faces, which again, it's adorable. Love. So that I used, again, the Nocturne ink and a little blending brush, got in there, added all the little faces, and then went and added that to the background on the dark gray cardstock, blended all of that. And then the final stencil in this set has little stars that just kind of fit in around these little ghosts, which again, I love. So I used the mustard seed and the carved pumpkin. Just went over that with the blending brushes. And then again, what ink was left over on the stencil, I just swirled the brush into that and blended that onto the inside of the card. So once I've got all those done, I now have like my background panels and the insides of all the cards. And then of course I'm going to add splatter because it's Halloween and it's tradition. So I put these into my splat box, black soot distress paint, as always. So squeeze that out onto just a palette, use my fan brush, and then I'm going to splatter all of these backgrounds with that black soot distress paint. Once these are splattered, I'm going to let everything dry. Once it's dry off camera, I die cut these down with just a rectangle wafer die, so that these will be smaller than my A2 card fronts. And then I also did a bunch of die cutting with some of the new shaker dies, as well as one of the previously released shaker dies that I purchased, I think it was like last year, and never got a chance to use. So I was like, I need to use it this year. So I did all of my die cutting, again, once everything was dry, so that I could make some shaker cards. So this first one was the pumpkin background, and this was the wafer die that came out last year. This is the Boo Shaker wafer die. And I die cut it out of the background. And then I also die cut it from some black cardstock. And then I have a little like acetate transparency sheet that's just slightly smaller than this gray cardstock piece. And to adhere it to the back of it, I'm just using glossy accents. This adheres really well. You don't need very much. Like on camera, it always looks like I'm using a lot. I'm not. You especially don't want to use too much because you don't want it oozing out everywhere. Any strong adhesive is going to work. I just wanted to use glossy accents because I'm using it for this piece as well to inlay it. And any little bits that do ooze out on top of the transparency, it's really easy to wipe it off when it's glossy accents. It's just personal preference. So you can do it like this, like I'm inlaying everything to create a shaker. But what you could also do is just either stack layers of that die cut, that Boo die cut, like don't die cut the background at all, just stack layers up and create like a kind of a standalone shaker, if that makes sense. You could also use foam tape to do that, but doing it this way just made it a little easier when I go in to add all the foam tape. So I added that, like inlaid that on top of the shaker. And then for my foam tape, I'm using this ThermoWeb black foam tape. This stuff is thick, so I only need to use one layer. I don't need to stack the layers. This stuff, it's very similar to the Studio Caudia foam tape I've been showing in recent videos. It is incredibly sticky. Like so sticky, it's kind of a pain in the butt, even with my little Teflon scissors that I'll, again, have a link to. But at the same time, I like my foam tapes to be sticky because then everything adheres and nothing's falling apart. You know what I mean? But it is very sticky. So I created a perimeter of foam tape around the window on the inside there, and then filled in all the other areas with foam tape so that everything will stay consistent. And then I filled this with the Spooky Night clay confetti. Love. Peeled off the backing, and then I have a piece of orange cardstock just slightly smaller than that gray cardstock piece. Press that into place, and this shaker is complete. Super cute, super fun. So I'm literally going to repeat this process with the next 2 shakers. They're all just going to be inlaid. So with my candy corn background on the white cardstock, I used the Cauldron shaker wafer die. So I die cut that from the background. I also die cut it from some black cardstock. Then I took my transparency and trimmed it down to just slightly smaller. And then glossy accents all around, like the perimeter of the opening and the rest of the cardstock. Press the transparency in, and then the little cauldron. Add glossy accents to the back of this, and then inlay that into place. Once that's inlaid, same procedure. I'm going to back this with foam tape, but I'm also going to add the new Boo Script wafer die. I was thinking, like, as I was looking at the previous one, like the pumpkin one, I was like, ooh, I could kind of copy this with this one. So that I die cut from orange cardstock and adhered into place. And then the background I did with the candy corn stencil on the gray cardstock, I used the new spiderweb wafer die cut that from the background, and then also die cut that from white cardstock. So same process. Got my transparency, so I'm going to line the back of this cardstock piece with my glossy accents, scribble a bit of that on there, stick that transparency and press that into place. Once that's adhered, I can adhere the die cut spiderweb, again using glossy accents, and then I can press that into place. And then both of these backgrounds are on the back. I will just use my foam tape and create a perimeter around the window. I'm not too concerned. It depends on the type of shaker elements you're using. If they're like things like glitter or things that are really fine and tiny, you have to be very, very careful and make sure there's no gaps. You know what I mean? But with these, I wasn't as careful as I normally am because these little like confetti clay pieces are a bit bigger. So I used a mix of like the Halloween party clay pieces and then the spooky night clay pieces, and then same thing. Filled them up, backed it with cardstock, pressed it into place, and we're done. And then with this little spiderweb dude, it comes with this little spider die, which I say this in all the videos. I have a spider phobia, but for Halloween, they just work. And again, this guy's so cute. That's why I love Pretty Pink Posh. The little critters and everything are just adorable. So I adhered him into place, and then again, filled in the, after I got the foam tape in place, I filled in the window. This time I mixed both of those little clay pieces together just because this was kind of a bit larger and I wanted them to like kind of show up a bit more. And then backed that with cardstock. So then I've got my third shaker element. And then for the fourth card, I'm not going to do a shaker, but I am going to make it glow in the dark. So I've got some vellum, and I have some little ghost stamps from the new Ghost Friends stamp set. So cute. I use my anti-static powder tool on the vellum. That just prevents the embossing powder from sticking to anything other than the stamped image. And then I stamp the ghosts with that shark tooth white ink. And then I'm going to coat these with glow in the dark embossing powder. So once these are coated, I'm going to melt this with my heat tool, and then it'll be good to go. People have been asking, like, do you say something in the card? Yes. There are little stamps in different sets. I know like many companies have them, like different little like interactive things. I'm not sure if any, I'm sure there are some though that say like this glows in the dark, that sort of a thing. You could totally do, use something like that. But with stuff like this, I literally would just say in the card, like, by the way, FYI, this glows in the dark, if they weren't aware, or if they didn't pick up on it. I would just write that on the inside of the card just as a little extra. So coated those with the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder, melted them, die cut them with the coordinating wafer dies, and then I'm going to run these through my little Xyron so that it adds adhesive fully to the back of these. Another way to do this would be to run the pieces through first and then die cut them. It just kind of eliminates this step where I'm pressing really hard with I'm using my bone folder, and then I trace around the perimeter before I remove that release paper. This just makes sure that there's no little sticky bits sticking out, because that's the only thing with Xyron that can be really annoying. But with ones like this, I don't mind this little tracing and rubbing bit. It takes no time at all. But if it's a detail wafer die, like if I use that little Boo script wafer die, that I would run the pieces of cardstock through the little Xyron first, get the adhesive in place, and then die cut them. Because the pressure the die cut machine would press it down, you wouldn't have to do the tracing or anything. It would work great. So if you're using any sort of like finicky or detailed wafer die or things like little sentiments, run through first the Xyron, then die cut. Makes life so much easier. But I just use liquid glue for all my sentiments. It's habit. So that's what I did. I die cut that 3 times, stacked them together to give it dimension, and then adhered it on top of my little ghosts. And because I'd used the Xyron on those, the adhesive doesn't show through. Plus it makes them just slightly more transparent, which was perfect, because then you could see the stenciled ghosts kind of through the vellum ones. And I don't know what I was like, this is amazing. I love it. So then as my final embellishment, I'm adding a ton of bling specifically to this card. I wasn't going to, and then I was just thinking about it. I'm like, well, it's a cauldron, there's going to be things bubbling out of it. So I've got a bunch of jewels from Pretty Pink Posh, and I just heavily applied those over the cauldron, and then ended up adding them to all the cards, just a few here and there. So just adhered those into place with craft tacky glue, and then again gonna add a bit more extra bling, because why not? So I'm using my clear glitter gloss aqua shimmer pen, and I'm tracing just the sentiments on these. It just gives it that little extra something, that little bit of shimmer and glitter to the sentiments without being, super busy, distracting, whatever. So I just traced along those with that shimmer pen, and then I will show at the end with my flashlight the glitter, because it's just so much fun. So once I've got all of the sentiments traced with the aqua shimmer pen, that's going to finish off all of these cards. And like I mentioned earlier, I will have a link below the video to my blog post, and I will have a supply list with links to all the supplies I used. So you can check out that info directly below the video. You can just expand the description box. All the info will be there, link to the blog post, supply list, links to all the supplies. This is actually also part of a blog hop for this release. So this is like day 2 of blog hops. I'm not even sure. There's multiple days, tons of inspiration. I will have links, so you can also check that out. And then, yeah, on the insides of all the cards, I stamped the little spooky wishes stamp from that Ghost Friends stamp set. So cute, so fun. And of course, like you can't go wrong with shakers. I don't know what it is, but there's something about having that little noise. So they shake, and they've got the little elements and the shimmer and the sparkle. And then of course with the final one, we've got these little glow in the dark ghosts, which is very subtle. My picture really sucks because it was not easy. My camera was just like, nope, trying to get a picture of these, but they glow in the dark, and they're really, really cute. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will have a link at the end to my current 2022 Halloween series playlist, so you can check that out as well. And I will continue to add to it as I post videos for this series, so you can look at that if you have missed any so far. And yeah, there's my little glow-in-the-dark ghosts. Aren't they adorable? Love. So I'll have links to that, and then the rest of the info in the description box below. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for thumbs upping, for commenting. I very much appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.